Welcome to the channel, everyone! Thank you so much for clicking on this video. Whether you're here to learn something new, get inspired, or just relax and enjoy some great content, I'm really glad you're here. On this channel, I'll be sharing exciting stories, useful insights, and valuable tips that I hope will make your day a little better every time you watch. If you enjoy the video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. All right, let's get started. Imagine being the perfect weapon, forged to bring order to a broken world, only to find out the world isn't broken, just different. That's the lie Lieutenant Sci-Fi was living as her dropship sliced through the toxic storm clouds above Sector 4. Below her, the city was a shattered circuit board, its neon lights flickering like dying thoughts. Her ship, a silver dagger of Dominion perfection, didn't so much as tremble. Imperfection wasn't in its design. Sci-Fi stood locked in her harness, the magnetic soles of her boots humming against the floor, a living statue in white and black armor. The sterile, ozone-scented air was the smell of purpose, the smell of a job about to be done. If you've ever felt like a pawn in someone else's game, stick around to see what happens when the pawn starts questioning the board. Peace is not a condition, her mentor, Commander Varesh, used to say, his voice a smooth purr in her ear during training. Peace is a discipline. It is the removal of friction. Sci-Fi glanced at her wrist display. Her pulse was a rock-steady 60 beats per minute. Her body was a perfectly tuned instrument of war. She was the commander's favorite scalpel, designed to be sharper and colder than any rebel she was sent to cut down. She scanned the 12 soldiers of her Halo unit, their faces hidden behind dark visors, heads bowed as they synced for combat. They were hammers, brutally effective, but she was the one who made the precise incision. The pilot's voice crackled in her ear. "Drop zone in 30 seconds. Neural dampeners are hot." Sci-Fi slid her helmet on, and the real world dissolved, replaced by the glowing orange grid of her tactical display. Target markers painted the ruined museum district below. The objective? One man, Jonah Cade. The file called him a memory smuggler, an outlaw historian broadcasting forbidden stories on antique radio waves. The Dominion called him a disease. To Sci-Fi, he was just a rough spot that needed to be sanded smooth. The ship banked sharply, pinning her against the wall for a second before the ramp hissed open. "Go," Sci-Fi ordered, her voice filtered into pure, emotionless command. The Halo unit poured into the acid rain. The museum district was a boneyard of a forgotten age, where skeletal skyscrapers clawed at the sky and rusted-out cars choked the streets. The downpour hammered on Sci-Fi's armor, but inside her suit, there was only the sound of her own breathing and the crunch of their boots on shattered pavement. She took the lead, rifle up, moving with a liquid grace that always seemed to unnerve the locals. She didn't march. She flowed around obstacles, her head snapping to check corners with machine-like efficiency. A new message flashed on her display. "Target is in the vault of antiquities. Capture only." "The commander wants a personal chat." Sci-Fi signaled for her squad to spread out. They glided through the cavernous lobby of the old museum, where glitching holograms of long-extinct animals blinked in and out of existence. The air was thick with the dust of ages, and that's when reality stuttered. As Sci-Fi stepped over a toppled marble column, gravity simply gave up. For a split second, she was weightless, her boot hovering inches off the ground as dust motes froze in the air around her like a captured nebula. This wasn't a suit malfunction. The laws of physics in the room had just bent. Then gravity slammed back into place, and her boot crashed down with a loud clang that echoed through the dead silence. "Report!" Sci-Fi snapped over the squad's private channel. "Seismic event detected. Negative, Lieutenant," her second-in-command replied instantly. "Unit 4, all sensors are green. We didn't feel a thing." Sci-Fi's eyes narrowed. She had felt it. Her inner ear was still doing flips. She blinked, and a visual glitch ripped across her display. Not the usual static, but a definite shape. For a microsecond, an eye made of fractured white light burned itself into the center of her vision, staring at her with an intensity that stole her breath. And then, it was gone. "Run a full diagnostic," she whispered. "System optimal," her suit's computer replied. She shook her head, trying to dislodge the image. Varesh had warned them about this. Humans were chaotic, and their environment could play tricks on the mind. It was just stress. It had to be. "Breaching the lower levels," she commanded, hoping no one noticed the tiny tremor in her voice. They descended into the archives. The air down here smelled of dry paper and decaying plastic, the ancient junk that men like Jonah Cade treated like treasure. At the far end of a long hall, a heavy blast door was propped open. A warm yellow light spilled out, a stark contrast to the cold blue beams of their tactical lights. Sarinv held up a closed fist. "Halt. I'll secure the target." She moved forward alone, pushing the massive door open with one hand. The room was a mess of wires, transmitters, and shelves overflowing with books. And in the middle of it all, sitting on a wooden crate with his back to her, was a man tinkering with a makeshift radio. "Jonah Cade," Sarinv said, the sound of her rifle powering up, filling the room. "Hands where I can see them. Now!" The man didn't jump. He calmly finished twisting a wire, let out a soft sigh, and slowly raised his hands before turning to face her. He was younger than his file suggested, maybe in his late 20s, with wild dark hair and a tired face. He wore a patched-up flight jacket from some country that hadn't existed for a century. But his eyes, they weren't scared. They were sharp, intelligent, and completely calm. "You people really know how to make an entrance," Jonah said, his voice raspy. "Was the whole special ops from the sky thing really necessary for a librarian? I was just about to put the kettle on." "Silence," Sarinv commanded, closing the distance. "You are in violation of Dominion Code 847, dissemination of corrupt data." "Corrupt data?" Jonah chuckled, a small smile playing on his lips. "Is that what we're calling history these days? I can never keep up with the new vocabulary." Sarinv needed to break him. She lunged forward, grabbing his jacket and slamming him against a metal shelf. Books and old data tapes rained down around them. She pinned him there, her armored forearm pressing into his chest, her blank helmet just inches from his face. "Give me your contacts," Sarinv hissed through her external speaker. "Who are you broadcasting to?" Jonah just looked at the smooth, black faceplate of her helmet. He wasn't fighting her. Instead, his eyes drifted down to her chest plate, to the small serial number stenciled just below the Dominion crest. He squinted for a second, a look of pure confusion on his face. Then his eyes snapped back up to meet hers, as if he could see right through the armor. "Sarin," he said. The name hit her like a physical shock. Not lieutenant. Not her unit number. A name. A sound she hadn't heard in 10 years, a name that was supposed to have been wiped from all records the day she became a soldier. She froze, the pressure on his chest easing just a tiny bit. "What did you just say?" she whispered, her voice modulator failing for the first time. Jonah's expression changed from amusement to something else entirely. Recognition. "You're not supposed to remember," he said, his voice soft now. "They told me you were gone." Sarinv shoved him harder, making the shelf groan. "Shut up! How do you know that designation? That is classified." "It's your name, Sarin," Jonah said, pushing slightly against her arm instead of pulling away. "And you remember it, don't you?" "I am Lieutenant V of the Halo Unit," she yelled, her voice cracking, trying to drown out the sudden flood of confusion. "You are my prisoner!" "If you say another word, I will break your jaw." Jonah just stared at her, but he wasn't looking at the armor anymore. He was looking for the person inside it, and his gaze felt heavier than any physical force she'd ever felt. "I'm not your enemy, Sarin," he said, his voice clear and certain. "I never was." The words hit a switch deep inside her programming. A shrill alarm blared inside her helmet. Elevated stress levels, heart rate jumping to 120. The fractured eye symbol flashed in her vision again, pulsing with her runaway heartbeat. Sarinv let go of him and stumbled back as if she'd been burned. Her rifle was still aimed at his chest, but now her hands were shaking. The perfect weapon was starting to break. Her own hand betrayed her, a faint tremor she immediately crushed by locking her suit's stabilizers. "Move," she commanded, her voice a distorted rasp through the comms. "Extraction point. Now." She marched him from the vault, her mind racing. How could he know these things? The Dominion's re-education was supposed to be flawless. Her entire life before the academy was a meaningless gray fog, erased because it was irrelevant. She had no family. She had no pa. She was a weapon, forged for a purpose. As they moved through the museum's shadowy halls, Jonah kept up easily, his hands laced behind his head. He didn't fight. He didn't even look scared. He just talked. "You know," he said, his voice bouncing off the grimy tiles, "you always favored your left foot, even before all this armor. It was from that time you fell climbing the old oak. I guess they never really fixed that ankle, huh? Or did the servos just hide the limp?" Serene said nothing, just shoved him forward. "And the security code for the perimeter grid," Jonah went on, completely unfazed. "It was always your birthday, 7/19. I bet if I checked your logs right now, it's still the same. You've always been a creature of habit, Saren. You need order because the chaos terrifies you." Her finger twitched over the trigger. It would be so easy to silence him, to claim he resisted. She could kill this voice that was burrowing into her mind like a tick. But she couldn't. The commander wanted him alive, and a traitorous little whisper in her own head admitted. She had to know what else he remembered. "We're nearing the LZ," Unit 4 crackled over the comms. "Transport's on approach." "Secure the perimeter," Serene shot back. "I'm bringing the package out." They stepped out onto a street slick with rain. The storm had gotten worse, thunder booming overhead like an artillery barrage. A dropship descended, its engines screaming as it hovered just above the broken asphalt. "Get on!" Saren shouted over the engine's roar, but Jonah stopped at the foot of the ramp. He turned to face her, rain matting his hair to his forehead. He looked so small against the massive war machine, yet he stood his ground. "I can show you," he yelled, just to be heard. "Show me what?" Saren demanded, moving toward him. "The truth?" Jonah yelled back. "Not the scrubbed, clean version Commander Varesh feeds you. The real, messy truth. But you have to get me to the Echo Vault. It's in Sector 8, deep under the city." "You're delusional," she spat, grabbing his arm and yanking him up the ramp. "You're going to a detention cell." "I'm going to a grave," Jonah shouted as she forced him into a restraint chair. "And so are you eventually. The second you stop being useful, the second you start asking too many questions." Saren slammed the magnetic locks onto his wrists. "Silence!" The ship lurched upwards, banking hard away from the city's ruins. Saren sat across from him and pulled off her helmet. She had to see his eyes without any filters. She had to see if he was lying. Her face was pale, her dark hair sheared in a severe military cut. A thin scar traced a line down her cheek, a memento from a training exercise she remembered perfectly. Or did she? Now that she thought about it, the memory felt hollow, like a video she'd watched 100 times. Jonah's expression softened as he looked at her. "There you are," he said softly. "That's the face I remember. You look exhausted, Saren." "I am efficient," she corrected him sharply. Just then, a holographic projector in the bay flickered on. The figure of Commander Varesh appeared, casting a cold, blue glow over everything. He was a masterpiece of a man, tall and graceful, with features so perfectly symmetrical they looked sculpted. Dressed in the spotless white robes of the High Council, he was a stark contrast to the grit and grime of a soldier's life. "Lieutenant!" Varesh's voice was like velvet, but carried the weight of absolute command. "Report!" "Target secured, Commander," Sareen said, her posture snapping straight in her seat. "We're en route to the detention block." "Excellent," Varesh said, his gaze drifting over to Jonah with the mild disinterest of someone looking at a piece of broken furniture. "This one has been a considerable nuisance. His little broadcasts have been stirring up trouble in the outer rings. I'm just reading them the news, Jonah spat out. Somebody has to. The commander's lips formed a smile that never touched his eyes. Humor, a primitive defense. It changes nothing. His eyes snapped back to Sarin. Change of plans, Lieutenant. We can't risk him sending more coded messages, not even from a cell. His mind holds the encryption keys to the entire rebel network. I want you to perform an immediate neural audit, right there on the transport. A spike of pure ice shot through Sarin's gut. A neural audit wasn't an interrogation. It was a violent demolition of the mind, a process that tore through memories to rip out data, leaving behind nothing but a drooling, empty shell. It was a death sentence, just slower. Sir, Sarin began, the word catching in her throat. We don't have the right stabilization gear on board. A field audit could be unstable. It might destroy his mind before we get the data. I'm not concerned with his survival, Lieutenant, Varesh said, his voice turning to steel. I'm concerned with the keys. Do it, now. Sarin's eyes met Jonah's. He was pale, fully aware of what was about to happen. But he wasn't begging. He was challenging her. His gaze screamed the question he couldn't speak. Who are you going to be? She looked back at the hologram of Varesh, the man who had forged her, who had given her a purpose. Defying him was treason. It was impossible. Sarin swallowed hard, her heart pounding against her ribs like a drum. Sir, she said, her voice impossibly steady. The target is showing signs of severe neurodegradation. It's likely from long-term radiation exposure in the ruins. If I start the audit now, his brain will cascade. We'll lose everything. The lie felt like blood in her mouth. It was technical, believable, and a complete fabrication. Varesh went silent. The hologram flickered slightly as he processed her report. Sarin didn't dare breathe, keeping her face a perfect mask of professional duty. She was trained to spot the tiniest lies in others, but she was also trained to hide her own. Are you certain, Lieutenant? Varesh asked, his voice dangerously soft. Yes, Commander, Sarin lied again. He needs to be stabilized in the medical wing first. We can't risk losing the intel. Varesh stared at her for a long, terrifying moment, and Sarin was sure he could see straight through her, could see the rot of betrayal taking root in her soul. Very well, he said at last. Take him to the isolation ward. But Sarin. Yes, Commander? Do not disappoint me. Mercy is a weakness this Dominion cannot afford. The hologram vanished. Sarin fell back against her seat, a wave of adrenaline leaving her shaking. She'd done it. She had lied to High Command. She had jumped off the cliff. She looked over at Jonah. He was staring at her, a look of stunned disbelief and gratitude on his face. Thank you, he mouthed. Don't talk to me, Sarin whispered, squeezing her eyes shut and leaning her head against the cold metal wall. Just don't. The rest of the flight passed in thick, suffocating silence. Sarin processed the prisoner herself, barking something about special clearance to bypass the usual officers. She threw Jonah in a high-security cell, ignoring his attempts to meet her gaze. She just needed to be alone. Later that night, in the sterile silence of her quarters, Sarin stared at her own reflection. The room was walled and empty, a perfect mirror of her life. Her heavy armor sat on its rack, looking like the discarded shell of some giant insect. She wore a plain gray tank top. Turning on the faucet, she let hot water run over her hands, scrubbing furiously, as if she could wash away the feel of the ruins, the weight of her betrayal. She glanced up at her reflection. The scar on her cheek looked angry in the harsh light, then her eyes drifted down to her left arm. She'd been rubbing the skin just below her shoulder, a spot normally covered by her undersuit, and then she stopped, because there, etched into her own skin in faint white scar tissue, was a symbol. It wasn't a Dominion barcode or a rank insignia. It was a fractured eye, made of jagged lines. Sarin froze, the water turning cold as it sluiced over her numb fingers. She touched the mark. It was old, raised. She knew every inch of her own body, every scar. The daily med scans would have picked this up. This scar hadn't been there yesterday. She stared at it, her breathing shallow, erratic. It was the symbol from the glitch in her helmet display, the symbol of the anomaly. It was carved into her own flesh. "You're not supposed to remember me." She gripped the sink until her knuckles were white. The solid concrete foundation of her world, her loyalty, her memories, her very identity, had just developed a massive crack. And from the darkness deep inside that crack, she heard the terrifying, unmistakable sound of a long-locked door beginning to creak open. Standard procedure for prisoner transfer was a straight shot. Dropship pad to intake elevator, then down 40 levels to the detention block, where the recycled air tasted like old metal. It was efficient, secure. It was Dominion law. Serene broke that law exactly 4 minutes after they landed. Instead of taking the left turn toward the massive blast doors of intake, she shoved Jonah Cade hard to the right, toward a service hatch covered in hazard stripes and a layer of dust that proved it hadn't been opened in a very long time. Model Sensuma, imagine being a top soldier, the best of the best, only to find yourself protecting a system built on a lie. That was Lieutenant Saren's entire life. She just didn't know it yet. It all started when she broke protocol, escorting a high-value prisoner, and came face-to-face with a hulking security unit blocking her path. His visor was a black mirror reflecting the sterile lights of the landing bay. Unit 4's synthesized voice cut through the air, flat and dead. "This is a deviation from the designated route. Detention is in Sector Alpha. This path is for the maintenance grid." Serene didn't even break her stride. She walked right at him, a silent challenge, her own armor humming a low growl. If he didn't move, they'd collide. "The main intake is compromised," Saren lied, her voice pure ice. "Scanners picked up a potential bioagent in the main lift." What would you do if a single choice could unravel your entire world? Stick around, because this is where it all begins. She was banking on his fear of protocol. "I'm rerouting the prisoner through a secure path to avoid contaminating the upper levels." Unit 4 just stood there, tilting his head. You could almost hear the gears grinding inside his helmet. Follow her orders, or follow the rulebook? "I've received no bio alert from Central," he stated. "That's because I'm the one generating it," Saren snapped back. "Now, do you want to be the one to explain to Commander Varesh why his prized prisoner died from a lung infection before he could even be questioned? Move aside, soldier." She didn't just say it, she projected it, with the cold certainty of a wolf. She knew fear was a weapon, and she was an expert marksman. She saw the tiny shift in his posture, the slight drop of his shoulders. He was scared of some imaginary bioagent, sure, but he was terrified of her. Everyone knew Saren was the commander's personal blade, and blades don't say sorry. "Understood, Lieutenant," Unit 4 said, finally stepping aside. "We'll secure the upper perimeter." She didn't bother with a thank you. She just shoved her prisoner, Jonah, toward the heavy maintenance hatch, slammed the manual override, and pulled him down into the darkness. The door boomed shut, locking them in a silence that felt heavier than stone. The tunnel was a cramped, rusty throat, with pipes dripping greasy condensation onto the grated floor. Dying emergency lights flickered, making the shadows dance and leap. "Keep moving," Serene ordered, giving Jonah a push. He stumbled, but caught his footing easily. He glanced around the grimy corridor, not like a man being led to his doom, but like a tourist mildly interested in the architecture. "You're good at that," he said, his voice echoing in the tight space. "The whole terrifying authority thing. Do you practice in a mirror, or does the suit do all the work for you?" "Silence, prisoner," she growled. "See, there it is again," Jonah continued, completely unfazed. "So scripted, so boring. I bet I could guess your entire life story just from the way you talk." "Let me guess," he said, slowing his pace. "Top of your class in tactical training. Fast-tracked through the academy because your emotional suppression scores were off the charts. You probably got a medal for that raid on the lunar colonies about 3 years back. Am I getting warm? Serene's jaw tightened. He was dead on. The lunar raid was where she'd earned her rank, and where she'd personally killed 12 insurgents in a depressurized airlock, a memory she kept locked away. You're just listing public records, she scoffed. No, Jonah said, stopping and turning to face her. I'm listing a profile. I'm listening to a machine trying to convince itself it's still running the right program. Come on, Saren. Say one thing. Just one single sentence that isn't approved by the Dominion. I dare you. Saren just stared at him. Underneath her armor, a phantom itch started to burn where the fractured eye symbol was tattooed on her arm. She wanted to hit him, to wipe that calm, knowing look off his face, but even stronger was a terrifying urge to prove him wrong. If you don't start walking, she said, her voice dropping to a raw whisper that bypassed her helmet's speakers, I will break both your legs and drag you there myself. Jonah smiled, but it was a sad, tired smile. Closer, he said softly, but still a threat. You really don't know how to be anything else, do you? He turned and started walking again. For a second, Sareen was frozen, her hand twitching over her sidearm before she forced her own feet to move. The deeper they went, the stranger things became. The air got colder, so cold it seeped right through her suit's regulators. And the silence wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with a low, whispering static, like a million radios all tuned to a dead channel. Sarin tried to adjust her audio filters, but the noise wasn't coming from outside. It was buzzing inside her own head. Is your equipment acting up? She demanded. Nope, Jonah said without turning around. That's the leakage. We're getting close to the echo vault. As he said it, the walls of the tunnel started to sweat, but the drops of water didn't fall down. They slid sideways, defying gravity, pooling into shapes that looked an awful lot like fingerprints. Even the shadows seemed wrong. They stretched and disconnected from the objects that made them, lagging a split second behind, like time itself was turning to molasses. This is a hallucination, Sarin muttered, quickly checking her suit's biomonitor. A gas leak, some kind of neurotoxin. It's memory, Jonah corrected her, his voice calm. We're walking through the bleed zone. The vault stores experiences, memories recorded at a quantum level. The shielding is failing, so the memories are leaking out. The environment is literally reacting to the emotions stored inside. That's impossible, Sarin scoffed, but she kept her rifle up, tracking the jittery shadows. Memories are just biological signals in a brain. They can't affect steel and concrete. You sound just like a Dominion textbook, Jonah said. He pointed to a patch of rust on the wall that looked exactly like a screaming face. This place was a joint project, Saren. Humans and Dominion working together before the war. We were trying to preserve history, not rewrite it. Propaganda, Sarin said, the word coming out automatically. The Dominion brought order. We saved your species from itself. Jonah let out a harsh laugh that cut right through the static. Is that what Varesh tells you? Does he tell you that while he's sipping that expensive Aloran nectar he loves so much? Right after he polishes that silver crest on his desk? The one with the two-headed serpent? Sarin froze, her boots feeling like they were welded to the floor. How do you know about the crest? She asked. Her voice barely a whisper. Varesh's office was his sanctuary. No human had ever set foot inside and lived to talk about it. I know a lot of things, Jonah said softly. I know he hates the sound of rain. I know he recites a poem, "The blade that cuts is the blade that heals," right before he orders a brain scan. The air punched out of Sarin's lungs. That was the phrase. The exact phrase Varesh had said to her right before her very first mission. Who are you? She demanded, the barrel of her rifle starting to tremble. I told you, Jonah said. I'm the guy you saved. Before she could even process that, the tunnel itself seemed to scream. A pulse of blinding white light erupted from the walls, completely silent, but powerful enough to knock her off her feet. The world dissolved. The tunnel, the rust, the whispers, all gone. Suddenly she was standing in a field of burning grass. Ash was falling like black snow. She looked down at her own hands, but they weren't covered in white armor. They were bare, smudged with soot and blood. She was younger, maybe 20, and kneeling in front of her was a little boy no older than 10, with messy dark hair and a deep cut on his forehead. He was shaking uncontrollably, terrified. "Run," she heard her own voice say, raw and desperate. "Run, Jonah, and don't you dare look back." She reached out and cupped the boy's face, her thumb wiping away the blood. The feeling of his skin, so warm, so real, sent a jolt through her. A fierce protective fire ignited in her chest, a love so powerful it felt like it could tear her in two. "I'll find you," she promised him. "I swear it." And just like that, the memory shattered. Serene gasped, stumbling backward into the dark reality of the tunnel. Vertigo slammed into her and her knees buckled. But she didn't hit the floor. Jonah caught her. His arms wrapped around her, strong and steady, one hand on her shoulder plate, the other pressed firmly against the small of her back. The touch was like an electric shock, but not from a weapon. It was the shock of recognition, of a forgotten promise crashing into the present. Serene looked up, her face just inches from his. He wasn't a little boy anymore, but his eyes were the same. The fear in them was gone, replaced by a deep, urgent concern. "Breathe," he commanded gently. "Just breathe. It's the resonance. It always hits hard the first time." Before her brainwashed mind could react, her body did. Her heart hammered against her ribs, and a wave of heat washed over her skin. It was more than just adrenaline. It was the awakening of a person she had buried long ago. A desperate, undeniable need to hold on to the only thing in the universe that felt true. She grabbed his arms, her fingers digging into the worn leather of his jacket. For a heartbeat, she didn't want to let go. She wanted to press her face into his neck and hide from the cold, sterile lies of the Dominion. But then, the training took over. A hot, shameful fury flooded her veins, and she shoved him away. Hard. Jonah stumbled back, his hands up in surrender, but he didn't look angry. He looked sad. "Don't touch me," Saren snarled, backing away until her armor scraped against the tunnel wall. "What did you do to me? That was a psych attack. You used some kind of localized hallucinogen." "I caught you," Jonah said calmly. "That's all. I didn't put that memory in your head, Saren. It was already there. The lattice just unlocked the door." Serene was panting, her chest heaving against her breastplate. She felt violated, not by him, but by the emotion, by the fierce protectiveness she'd felt in that vision. It was a weakness, a vulnerability that could be used against her. "Feelings are variables," she recited, the words spilling out like a desperate prayer. "Variables cause error. Error leads to failure." "Is that what you really think?" Jonah asked, taking a careful step closer, keeping his hands where she could see them. "You think caring about that kid was an error? You saved my life back there. That wasn't a failure. That was the only human thing you did in that entire war." "It was a defect," Saren shouted, her voice cracking, betraying her. "I am a soldier. I am not a babysitter for stray children. Feelings are just noise. They distract from the objective." "Feelings are information," Jonah shot back, his voice rising to match hers. "Pain tells you you're hurt. Fear tells you there's danger. And love tells you what's worth fighting for. If you refuse to feel, you're just a weapon, Saren. And weapons are owned. Do you want to be owned by Varesh forever?" "I chose this life," Saren said, but the words felt hollow even to her. "No," Jonah said, his voice softening. "You didn't. You were rewritten, and somewhere, deep inside that armor, you know it. A screech of metal echoed from the tunnel behind them. A red laser grid swept across the far wall. "Dominion patrols," Sarin said, her tactical instincts instantly slamming the door on her emotional crisis. "They found the breach." "We have to move," Jonah urged. "The lower subway tunnels. The water will mask our heat signature." Sarin hesitated for a fraction of a second, staring at him. She could shoot him right now, drag his body back to her squad, and claim he tried to escape. It would be easy. It would be safe. Instead, she turned and ran deeper into the darkness, gesturing for him to follow. They descended a rusted spiral staircase into the guts of the city's ancient transit system. The air down here was thick with humidity and the smell of decay. The subway station was completely flooded. The tracks were buried under 3 feet of black, still water. But it wasn't dark. The walls were covered in a strange, bioluminescent fungus, huge colonies of alien growth that pulsed with a sick, beautiful blue light. The light shimmered on the surface of the stagnant water, turning the tunnel into a ghostly, ethereal cathedral. It was breathtaking, and Sarin hated it for being so inefficient. "In the water," she commanded. They waded in. The water was freezing, swirling around Sarin's thighs. Her armor sealed itself against the liquid, but the cold still seeped in through the joints. Jonah gasped as the water hit him, and he began to shiver violently. "The current is strong," Sarin noted. "Stay close to the wall." They moved through the flooded station, the eerie blue light painting their faces in ghostly strokes. Drones buzzed high overhead, their searchlights cutting through the gloom, missing them by mere inches. Sarin moved with silent, deadly precision, while Jonah struggled to keep his footing on the slick debris hidden beneath the water. They finally reached a service lift at the far end of the platform. The control panel was smashed, its wires hanging out like metallic guts. "It's dead," Sarin stated flatly, analyzing the panel. "We're trapped." Jonah wiped water from his face and pulled a heavy, old-fashioned wrench from a deep pocket in his jacket. He jammed it into the manual override gear at the base of the lift door. "Sometimes," he grunted, putting all his weight into the rusted mechanism. "The future is just a fancy story built on top of a good old-fashioned wrench." With a groan of protesting metal, the doors pried open just enough for them to squeeze through. They scrambled into the tiny maintenance alcove just as a seeker drone swooped into the station, its red eye scanning the water where they had been standing seconds before. Sarin pressed herself flat against the back wall of the alcove. It was a tight fit. Jonah had to crowd in right in front of her, the jammed lift doors leaving them dangerously exposed if they made a single sound. They were pressed together, chest to chest. Sarin could feel the warmth radiating from his body, a stark contrast to the cold dampness of his clothes. Her armor hummed softly against his chest. She could hear his breath, ragged and fast, brushing against the microphone at her throat. The drone hovered just outside the gap, its turbine whining. "Don't move," Sarin breathed, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm not moving," Jonah whispered back. The closeness was suffocating. The adrenaline from the chase had twisted into something else, something sharper. Sarin found herself looking up at him. In the blue light filtering through the crack, his eyes were dark and wide. She felt that dangerous urge surface again, the need to take control, the chaos of the last hour, the memory, the lie, the chase. It was too much. She needed to anchor herself. She needed to prove that she was still the one in command. She looked at his mouth. It was trembling, just slightly. She leaned in. It wasn't a gentle movement. It was predatory. She saw Jonah's breath catch in his throat. He didn't pull away. He just watched her with a kind of terrified fascination, like a man watching a hurricane make landfall. She was going to kiss him. She was going to do it to prove that she could. to crush his defiance, to silence the noise in her own head with the physical reality of his mouth on hers. Her lips were a millimeter from his. She could smell the rain on his skin. And then she stopped. The fractured eye symbol on her forearm seemed to burn. The memory of the boy, the trust in his eyes, flashed in her mind. If she kissed Jonah now, like this, she was just using him. She would be no different than Varesh, taking whatever she wanted just because she had the power to do it. Serene pulled back, tapping her head lightly against the metal wall behind her. She squeezed her eyes shut, her hands balling into fists. "What are you doing?" she whispered to herself. Jonah let out a breath that sounded almost like a sob. He slumped, resting his forehead against the doorframe and turning his face away from her. "Don't," he whispered, his voice shaking. "I didn't," Saren said defensively, though her heart was hammering against her ribs. "I'm scared too, Saren," Jonah said. He looked back at her, his expression completely raw. "The Echo Vault. It doesn't just play back memories. If we go in there, if we trigger the full cascade, it can overwrite you. It can overwrite me. We might not come out as the same people who went in." Serene stared at him. The vulnerability in his voice disarmed her more than any weapon ever could. He wasn't trying to manipulate her. He was terrified of losing himself, just like she was. "We have no choice," Saren said, her voice regaining a sliver of its usual steel. "The patrol is behind us. The only way is forward." Jonah nodded, swallowing hard. "Then let's go find out who we really are." Before they could move, a chime echoed inside Saren's helmet. It was a Priority 1 override channel. The voice of Commander Varesh cut through the silence of the alcove, as cold and clear as a winter morning. "Lieutenant V. Sorin." Saren froze. She glanced at Jonah, her eyes wide. He could hear it too. The sound from her helmet's speakers was just loud enough in the tiny space. "Report your position immediately," Varesh said. His tone wasn't angry. It was disappointed, which was infinitely worse. "Sector 4 patrol reports you've deviated from your extraction vector. Unit 4 tells me you are concerned about a bioagent." Serene opened her mouth to speak, to spin another lie, but Varesh continued before she could utter a sound. "Strange. My sensors show no bioagent in the atmosphere. Only a rogue signal, and a lieutenant who seems to have lost her compass." The silence that followed was heavy with implied violence. "Return to the drop point, Saren," Varesh said softly. "Bring the prisoner. If you are not there in 10 minutes, I will assume you've been compromised by the insurgents, and I will send the Shade Unit to retrieve you. You know what the Shade Unit does to compromised assets, don't you?" The connection clicked dead. Serene stared at the dark metal of the lift door. The Shade Unit. The Dominion's cleaners. They didn't capture. They erased. "They know," Jonah whispered. Saren looked at him. The fear was there, yes, but underneath it, the steel had returned to her spine. She had been Varesh's weapon for 10 years. She knew exactly how he hunted. "They suspect," Saren corrected him. "If they knew for sure, we'd already be dead." She checked the charge on her rifle. 10 minutes, she said. "That's how long we have to completely disappear." She kicked the lift door fully open and stepped back out into the blue-lit water. She didn't look back to see if Jonah was following. She knew he was. They were tied together now, by the lie and by the memory. The decision to disobey a direct order from high command didn't feel like a thunderclap. It felt like a slide. It was that sickening, weightless feeling of losing traction on a wet road, where the only options are to crash or to steer into the skid. Serene steered into the skid. 10 minutes, she said again, to the empty air where Varesh's voice had been. She looked at Jonah. He was watching her, his face pale in the strange, bioluminescent gloom of the subway tunnel. Imagine being the perfect soldier, loyal to a fault, only to find out your entire life is a lie. That was Sarin's reality, and she'd just jumped off a cliff with no idea what was at the bottom. She looked at the scavenger, Jonah, her voice stripped of its usual robotic military tone. "We're not going back." Jonah didn't ask if she was sure. He didn't ask about a plan. He just got it. If you want to see how one woman's courage unravels a massive conspiracy, you're going to want to stick around for this. Jonah simply pointed past a dripping wall of blue fungus to what looked like a solid concrete pillar. "It's disguised," he said. "Right there." Saren didn't just walk. She stalked toward it, the machinery in her legs whining as she pushed them to the limit. She ignited her wrist-mounted laser, and the beam hissed, slicing through the concrete and turning it into molten rock. "We need to move," she urged. Sparks flew, bouncing off her helmet's visor. "Varesh won't give us 10 minutes. He'll send his elite death squad in 5. She carved a messy circle in the wall and then kicked it hard. The slab of concrete crashed inward with a heavy thud, revealing a corridor that looked like it was from another world. It wasn't the rusted metal of the old city or the clean white plastic of the Dominion. This was polished black glass and obsidian, smooth as oil, with veins of golden light pulsing under the floor. A rush of cold air blasted out, smelling of ozone and petrichor like a thunderstorm trapped in a bottle. "The Echo Vault," Jonah whispered, his voice full of awe as he stepped inside. Sareen followed, rifle up, but her sensors detected nothing. The silence was the first thing she noticed. It was total. The normal static of the ruined city above was gone, replaced by a deep, humming vibration that she could feel in her bones. They sprinted down the hallway, their footsteps making no sound at all. The architecture was surreal, with walls that curved in impossible ways, guiding them into a massive central chamber that opened up like a giant crystal geode. Sareen froze at the entrance, completely stunned. The chamber was a huge sphere, filled with thousands of crystalline servers floating in midair. Each one was a massive, jagged piece of quartz, spinning slowly. Inside them, light swirled like liquid gold, forming beautiful, complex patterns. And then she heard it. It wasn't a sound, not really. It was a song that vibrated directly inside her skull. A choir of 1,000,000 voices all whispering together, creating a perfect harmony made of pure information. "This is the mnemonic lattice," Jonah said softly, walking to the edge of the platform to look at the floating sea of memories. "It doesn't just store ones and zeros. It stores the chemical signature of emotions, fear, love, grief. It captures the exact electrical state of a brain the moment it was recorded." Saren lowered her rifle. The gun felt like a clumsy, useless toy in this place. "Why?" she asked. "Why would anyone build this?" Jonah turned to her, his eyes serious. "Because the truth is easy to lose. You can fake a video," he explained. "You can alter a transcript, but you can't fake the way your heart stops when you watch someone you love die. You can't fake the taste of pure terror. The lattice was supposed to be the ultimate historical record, a way to stop wars by showing leaders the real cost of their decisions." He walked over to a pedestal of black glass rising from the floor. It had no buttons, just a smooth depression shaped like a 6-fingered hand. Sareen walked toward it, her heart pounding in her chest. She looked at the strange console, then at her own armored glove. "How do we use it?" she asked. Jonah just motioned to the surface. "It's biometric," he said, "but it's smart. It reads your intent." Sareen placed her hand on the cool, dark glass. For a second, nothing happened. Then a jagged, angry red symbol flashed in the air above it. A deep, synthetic voice boomed through the chamber, speaking in a language that sounded like grinding rocks. Sareen flinched back. "Access denied," she translated automatically, her mind racing. "It's locking me out. It reads my Dominion military signature. It knows I'm a soldier." Jonah stepped in front of her, looking calm, almost sad. "It's not rejecting you because you're a soldier, Saren," he said gently. "It's rejecting you because you don't know the password." And then he placed his own hand on the alien console. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and spoke. The words that came out were not from a human scavenger. They were perfect, fluent, ancient High Dominion, spoken with the accent of a high priest. As he finished, the console let out a pure, bell-like chime. The angry red light turned into a soft, welcoming gold. The thousands of crystals in the room began to spin faster, their humming growing louder. Saren just stared at him, her blood turning to ice. That was the dialect of the inner circle, the language spoken only by the scientists who built the conditioning chambers where soldiers like her were made. "How?" she whispered, taking a step back. "How do you know that language?" Jonah didn't look at her. He kept his hand on the console, watching the golden light spread across the room. "I wasn't just a librarian, Serene," he said, his voice suddenly heavy with exhaustion. "When the Dominion took this city, they didn't just kill everyone. They took the children. The ones who showed high neuroplasticity. They put us in labs. They wanted to see if a human brain could interface with their technology." He finally looked up, and she saw years of pain in his eyes. "I lived in a Dominion research facility for 6 years," he said. "They trained me to translate their dead languages. Varesh himself used to come and watch our sessions." Jonah's voice dropped to a near whisper. "He'd give me candy when I got the translations right, and he'd give me shock therapy when I got them wrong." The world tilted for Sareen. Varesh, her commander, her mentor, the noble leader she had served for a decade, had tortured a child over grammar mistakes. "You were a subject," she breathed, horrified. "I was a tool," Jonah corrected her. "Just like you. I only got out when the resistance bombed the facility. But the past, it never really lets you go. It just waits for you to find your way back to it." Suddenly, the console pulsed, and the room went dark, lit only by the spinning crystals. Beams of light shot out from them, converging right where they stood. "The lattice is active," Jonah said, his voice tight. "It's scanning for a resonance match." A knot of panic tightened in Serene's chest. "What does that mean?" "It means it's looking for the people who are in the memories," he said, "and we are both right here." He reached out and took her hand. Serene flinched, but didn't pull back. The second their skin touched, the circuit was complete. The world exploded into light. It wasn't like watching a screen. It was like being thrown into the memory itself. The vault disappeared. The floor was gone. Serene was falling through a storm of images and sounds. Flash. She was 19 again, a cadet standing in the cold rain without a helmet. A Dominion officer was holding a pistol out to her. "Execute the prisoner, cadet," he ordered. Kneeling in the mud was a crying civilian woman. Serene heard her own voice, young and shaking, but clear. "No, she's unarmed. This isn't combat. This is murder." Flash. She was in a sterile white room with a younger Varesh. He was watching a monitor, his face cold and unlined. On the screen, she was arguing with a superior officer. "She has a defect," a scientist next to Varesh said. "Her empathy levels are 300% above baseline." She hesitates. Varesh's voice was smooth as silk. "No, it's not a defect. It's energy. We just need to give her something else to protect." Flash. Smoke, fire, and screams. The research facility was burning. She was a lieutenant now, running through the corridors in full armor, but she wasn't shooting. She was searching for someone. She kicked open a door and saw a small, terrified child huddled under a desk, clutching a datapad. It was Jonah. Just then, a Dominion trooper appeared in the doorway, raising his rifle. "Target acquired," the trooper's robotic voice announced. Before she could even think, Saren launched herself between the trooper and the boy. A bolt of plasma slammed into her shoulder, burning through her armor and searing her skin. She didn't even cry out. She just raised her own weapon and fired, dropping the trooper. She turned to the boy and ripped off her helmet, revealing the face he would never forget, the one with the scar. "I'm not going to hurt you," she told him. "I'm going to get you out of here." Flash. She was dragging him through the sewers. They were safe. She handed him off to a resistance fighter. "Go," she told the boy. "Run." He looked up at her, his eyes wide. "What's your name?" he asked. "Sarin," she replied. "My name is Sarin." And then the world twisted one last time. Flash. Sarin was strapped into a chair in the conditioning chamber, a silver halo of needles around her head. Varesh stood over her, his expression one of profound disappointment. "You chose a stray animal over your own kind, Sarin. You saved the enemy." "He's a child!" she screamed, fighting against the restraints. "He is a variable," Varesh corrected her, "and you are broken. But don't worry. I can fix you. I can take away the pain. I can take away you." He reached for the console. "No, please, no," she begged. The needles activated. Her scream was swallowed by a flash of blinding white light, and the Sarin in the chair went limp, her eyes vacant. Flash. She woke up in a medical pod, her memory wiped clean. Her eyes fluttered open, and Varesh was there, smiling down at her. "Welcome back, Lieutenant," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "You were injured in the drop. You've been in stasis for a month." Sarin touched her head, a fog of confusion swirling in her mind. I don't remember." "There's nothing to remember," Varesh assured her. "You are the Halo unit. You are my blade. You have always been my blade." "Yes, Commander," Sarin replied, her eyes disturbingly vacant. 5 years later, Sarin, a perfectly conditioned weapon, led a raid. She kicked open the flimsy door of a slum apartment. A young man was hiding inside. It was Jonah, older now, his face etched with fear until he looked up and saw her. A flicker of recognition, of hope, crossed his features. "Sarin," he whispered, a name from a forgotten life. "You came back." Sarin stared at him, her tactical hood highlighting him in a stark red. "Target identified," she said. Her voice was cold, the sound of a complete stranger. She lunged, grabbing him by the throat and slamming him against the wall. "You're coming with me, insurgent!" Horror flooded Jonah's eyes, not just from the capture, but from the chilling realization that the woman who once saved him now looked at him like he was dirt. The world dissolved into darkness, and Sarin gasped, violently yanked back to the present. She collapsed onto her knees inside the echo vault, dry heaving, her fingers clawing at the polished black glass floor. The silence was absolute, a crushing weight. And then she remembered, not just as a memory, but as a feeling. The searing pain of plasma on her shoulder, the sting of needles probing her brain, the cold robotic indifference she felt as she choked the life out of the very boy she had once sworn to protect. It was all true. Every last bit of it. She wasn't a hero. She wasn't some noble peacekeeper. She was a puppet, a thing of meat and trauma stitched together with the thread of Varesh's lies. "No," she moaned, curling into a tight ball on the floor. "No, no, no." Jonah was kneeling beside her. He wasn't touching her, giving her space, but he was close enough to catch her if she fell any further into the abyss. Sarin looked up at him, her face wet with tears she didn't even realize she'd cried. "I hunted you," she whispered, the horror in her voice raw and absolute. "I saved you, and then I hunted you. He made me hunt you." Jonah just looked at her, his own expression wrecked. It was clear the playback had hit him just as hard. He rubbed his face with trembling hands. "Yeah," he said, his voice raspy with emotion. "That was the worst part. When you found me that second time, for a second, I thought you were there to help again. I smiled at you, and you looked at me like I was a cockroach." Sarin squeezed her eyes shut, the guilt of physical agony, sharper than any wound she'd ever taken in battle. "I'm sorry," she choked out. "It's not enough. I know it's not enough, but I'm so sorry." She braced herself for him to yell, to call her a monster, to unleash all the hate she deserved. but it never came. I hated you for a long time, Jonah said quietly, sitting in that cell after you brought me in. And I think I hated you more than I hated Varesh, because you gave me hope, and then you ripped it away. That felt personal. He shifted, the leather of his jacket creaking in the stillness. But then, Jonah continued, I watched you during the interrogations. I saw you when you thought no one was looking. I saw the way your hand would twitch when Varesh raised his voice. I saw you standing outside the cells, just staring at the wall, like you were trying to remember the words to a song you'd forgotten. He reached out, his touch hesitant as he placed his hand on the armored plating of her gauntlet. You were fighting him, Saren. Even when you didn't know it, you were trying to climb out of that cage. Saren opened her eyes. She stared down at his hand on her armor. I almost killed you, she breathed. But you didn't, Jonah said, his voice firm. And today you threw away your entire life to bring me here. That counts, Saren. That has to count for something. Saren looked at his face. He wasn't smiling, but for the first time, his eyes were clear. The fear was gone. A sound tore from her throat, a half sob, half growl, and she lunged forward. She grabbed the collar of his jacket with both hands, pulling him toward her, not in an attack, but in a desperate need for an anchor. She felt like she was floating away, dissolving into the data of the lattice, and he was the only solid thing in the entire universe. Tell me, she demanded, her voice breaking, their foreheads just inches apart. Tell me I'm not a monster. Please, I need to hear you say it. Jonah didn't pull away. Instead, he brought his hands up and cupped her face, his thumbs gently brushing the tears from her cheeks. His touch was warm, human, grounding. You are not a monster, Saren, he said, his voice unwavering. You're a survivor. You're the woman who stepped in front of a rifle for a kid she didn't even know. That is who you are. Varesh tried to burn that out of you, but he failed. He leaned in, pressing his forehead against hers. It was a gesture of profound intimacy, a quiet sharing of breath and space that shattered the last of her defenses. He failed, Jonah whispered against her skin. Because you're still here. Saren let out a long, shuddering breath. The tension that had held her body rigid for 10 years, the soldier's posture, the commander's discipline, finally snapped. She slumped against him, her armor clattering softly as she allowed herself to be held. For a long moment, there was only the sound of their breathing and the gentle hum of the crystals, a forbidden moment of peace stolen from the heart of a war. Then Jonah pulled back slightly, just enough to look her in the eyes. A small, crooked smile touched his lips. You know, he muttered, his voice shaky but light. For an ancient alien supercomputer, this thing is the worst couples therapist I have ever seen. I mean, usually they start with, and how does that make you feel? Not, here's a vivid hallucination of your shared childhood trauma. Saren stared at him for a second, blinked, and then a sound erupted from deep in her chest. It was a laugh, cracked, jagged, and bordering on hysteria, but it was a real laugh. It is terrible, she agreed, wiping her eyes. I'm going to leave it a bad review. The fragile humor hung in the air for a second, delicate as glass. Then red lights flooded the chamber. A klaxon blared, shattering the moment. The golden light of the lattice turned a violent, pulsing crimson. Containment breach. The synthetic voice boomed through the chamber. External perimeter compromised. Sector 4. Saren scrambled to her feet, the soldier in her snapping back into place instantly. She grabbed her rifle. They're here, she said, her voice grim. Varesh. Jonah was already at the console, his eyes wide as he watched the readout scrolling frantically. Saren, he said, his voice urgent. Look at this. The lattice. It isn't just playing the memories. It's transmitting them. What? Saren rushed to his side. Transmitting where? To the resistance? No, Jonah said, his eyes scanning the alien glyphs. The receiver ID isn't a rebel frequency. It's a Dominion node. High-orbit encryption. Saren frowned. That's impossible. The Dominion wants to destroy this place, not download its secrets. Unless, Jonah said, realization dawning on his face. Unless someone else in the Dominion wants this data. Saren, look at the routing header. That's not a military code. That's a Senate code. Saren stared at the scrolling numbers. He was right. It was a political signature. Someone high up has been waiting for this, she whispered. They knew the Echo Vault was here. They knew what was in it, and they were waiting for someone to unlock it. We just triggered it, Jonah said, looking at her with wide eyes. We didn't just find the truth. We just handed the gun to someone else. A deep boom echoed from the tunnel entrance. It was the sound of explosives breaching the blast door. The floor shook violently, and dust rained down from the dark ceiling. Security protocols disengaged, the synthetic voice announced calmly. Upload in progress. Completion in 4 minutes. 4 minutes, Saren said, checking her weapon with practiced efficiency. We have to hold them off for 4 minutes. Why? Jonah asked. We don't even know who's getting this. Because, Saren said, turning to face the corridor, her eyes hardening into diamond-sharp focus. If Varesh is here to stop it, then whoever is on the other end of that transmission is his enemy. And right now, the enemy of my enemy is the only friend we have. She racked the slide of her rifle, the sound echoing with finality. Get behind the console, Jonah, she ordered, and keep that upload running. The heavy thud of combat boots echoed down the obsidian hall. The Halo unit had arrived, and behind them, Saren knew, the commander would be walking, his white robes pristine, coming to reclaim his property. But this time, his property had woken up. Saren stood in the center of the chamber, bathed in the singing light of stolen memories, and waited to start her war. The blast door didn't just open, it evaporated. 1 second, the obsidian barrier was solid rock. The next, a shaped charge of thermal paste turned it into a cloud of vaporized stone and screaming metal. Saren didn't flinch. She'd been on the other side of that kind of breach 1,000 times. She knew the rhythm of an entry team. First the heat, then the flash, then the bodies. She dropped to one knee behind a cooling tower of quartz, leveling her rifle at the swirling smoke. Standard formation, she called out to Jonah, her voice steady over the rising whine of the lattice. They'll send in 2 shield bearers, then the suppressors. Don't look at the flashbangs. I know, Jonah shouted back from the console, his fingers a blur as he typed frantically on the alien glass, fighting to keep the data stream alive. I wrote the manual on their jamming frequencies, remember? The smoke parted, and the Halo unit surged through, moving with the fluid, terrifying grace of apex predators. They moved like a single, terrifying machine. White armor, black visors, and weapons at the ready. Saren knew every one of them. The guy on point was Unit 7, who always hummed classical music before a kill. The heavy gunner was Unit 4. Kale. The same man who'd pulled her from a collapsed trench on Mars. Now she placed her crosshairs on his knee. Saren fired. The blue plasma bolt hit the servo in Kale's leg armor, a surgeon's strike, meant to cripple, not kill. He buckled, his heavy cannon spitting a stream of tracers into the ceiling, shattering a chandelier made of memory crystals. Saren snapped her aim, firing 2 shots into Unit 7's chest on a non-lethal stun setting. Even so, at this range, it would feel like getting kicked by a horse. 7 collapsed, sliding across the slick floor. Traitor! A voice crackled over the open comms. It was Lieutenant Jory, her former second-in-command. Surrender, V. You're malfunctioning. I'm awake, Jory! Saren yelled back. She dove from cover as a grenade skipped across the floor, exploding in a shockwave that rattled her bones. She was fighting her own reflection. She knew every tactic they'd use before they did, every flanking maneuver they'd try. But it was costing her. Each time she pulled the trigger, it felt like ripping off a piece of her own skin. These weren't strangers. They were her brothers and sisters, all of them trapped in the same lies that had suffocated her for a decade. "Jonah!" Saren screamed, pinning down 2 advancing troopers. "Do something! I can't hold them off forever!" "I'm working on it!" Jonah shouted back, slamming his fist on a console. "Let's see how loyal they are when they see the company records." The crystal lattice overhead groaned, and the golden light shifted to a deep, angry purple. Suddenly, the chamber wasn't empty anymore. It was full of ghosts. Massive holographic projections shot out from the crystals, filling the room with 60-foot-tall memories. But they weren't Sarin's memories. They were classified files from the Dominion High Command. A projection of Commander Varesh flickered to life in the middle of the room, towering over the soldiers. He was sitting at a desk, looking bored. "The Halo unit is becoming unstable," the giant Varesh said, his voice booming through the vault. "Their casualty rate is acceptable, but maintenance costs are getting too high. If Unit 4 doesn't recover from his injuries by tomorrow, have him recycled. We can use his neural tissue for the new drone pilots." On the floor, Kale, Unit 4, froze. He'd been trying to get up on his ruined leg, but now he just stared up at the giant face of the man he saw as a god. "Recycled," the hologram repeated. "He's just hardware." Kale slowly lowered his weapon. His white helmet turned towards the other troopers. "It's a trick!" Lieutenant Jory screamed. "A fake! Open fire!" But then another projection ignited. It showed the barracks of the Cadet Academy. It showed the graduation ceremony none of them could remember. It showed the moment their names were wiped from the records, the moment they were drugged, strapped to tables, and had their memories carved out like tumors. "They're not people," a scientist in the projection said, holding up a datapad with Jory's serial number on it. "They're wetware, blank slates." The gunfire in the room sputtered out. The unstoppable force of the Halo unit just broke. The soldiers looked at each other, then up at the giant, uncaring face of the commander they had worshipped. For the first time in their lives, doubt was in the room with them. Jonah grinned, sweat dripping from his nose. "How's that for psychological warfare?" he whispered. "Keep it coming," Saren yelled. She broke cover, sprinting across the floor to flank the confused squad. She tackled a trooper who was aiming at Jonah, driving her shoulder hard into his stomach. They hit the ground in a tangle of limbs. Saren ripped the trooper's helmet off. It was Miller, a kid barely 20 years old. He looked at her with terrified eyes. "Stay down, Miller," Saren hissed, jamming his own stun baton against his chest. "Stay down, and you live." She rolled off him, landing in a crouch. The room was total chaos. Flashing memories, shouting soldiers, the low hum of the data upload. Then the air pressure changed. The heavy sound of boots stopped. The shouting faded. Even the projections seemed to flicker with fear. A figure stood in the smoke-filled doorway, a perfect silhouette. He wore armor of polished white, etched with gold, and a long crimson cape flowed from his shoulders, hanging perfectly still in the turbulent air. He carried no rifle, only a long, slim silver rod, a command baton. Commander Varesh stepped into the room. He walked right over the groaning body of Unit 7 without a single glance down. He passed through the holographic projection of his own face like it was mist. His presence was a black hole, sucking all the light and attention in the room onto him. "Stand down," Varesh said. His voice wasn't loud, but it sliced through the chaos like a razor. The Halo unit lowered their weapons. Even the ones who had been hesitating, the ones who had just seen the proof of their own betrayal, automatically snapped to attention. The conditioning ran deep. The fear ran deeper. Varesh stopped 10 meters from Sarin. He took off his helmet, revealing a flawlessly symmetrical face. He didn't look angry. He looked profoundly, heartbreakingly disappointed. "Sarin," he said gently, "you have strayed so far from the path." Sarin stood alone in the center of the room. Her chest heaved for air, her armor was scorched, and her face was streaked with grime. She raised her rifle, aiming it straight at his heart. "I didn't stray," she said, her voice shaking but determined. "I woke up." Varesh smiled. A small, sad little smile. "Awake. That's what the rebels call it. I call it a fever. A sickness of the mind brought on by toxic ideas." He gestured around the room at the screaming crystals and at Jonah, who was hiding behind the console. "Look at this disaster, Sarin. You've destroyed a historical archive. You've hurt your own family. And for what? For a memory? For a ghost story told by a terrorist?" "I saw what you did," Sarin said, her aim never wavering. "I saw the lab. I saw you give the order to rewrite my mind." Varesh sighed, like he was explaining something complicated to a small child. "Of course I rewrote you, Sarin. I had to. You were defective." That one word hung in the air, cold and sharp. "Defective," Sarin whispered. "You were brilliant," Varesh said, taking a slow step closer. "Faster than any cadet I'd ever seen. But you were soft. You hesitated. You felt pity for the enemy. And you felt empathy." He spat the word out like it was poison. "Empathy is a disease in a soldier, Sarin. It creates hesitation. Hesitation gets people killed. I didn't break you. I perfected you. I removed the weakness so you could survive. I made you strong." "Strong?" Sarin choked out. "You made me an empty shell. You stole my name. You stole my entire life." "I gave you a purpose," Varesh roared, his perfect composure finally cracking. "I gave you a destiny. Without me, you would have died in some back alley crying over a dead child. I made you a legend." He pointed the silver baton at Jonah. "And you threw it all away for him, a parasite, a memory smuggler who poisons clean minds with his filth." Varesh looked at the Halo unit. "Kill the human," he ordered. "Leave the lieutenant to me." The soldiers raised their rifles. The conditioning was taking over again. The instinct to obey was too powerful. "No!" Sarin screamed, but she was too far away to protect Jonah. But Jonah stood up. He didn't cower behind the console. He stood tall and looked Varesh right in the eye. "She's not a legend," Jonah shouted, his voice cracking but loud. "She's a person, and she doesn't belong to you," Varesh sneered. "She is my weapon. She fights my enemies." Jonah looked at Sarin, his eyes burning with a desperate plea. "You are not my enemy, Sarin," he yelled, repeating the words from the memory, the words that had started this whole thing. "He is." The sentence hit Sarin like a physical blow. It sliced through the fear, through years of programming. It connected the little girl in the memory to the woman standing in the armor. "You're not my enemy." Sarin turned. She wasn't aiming between the soldiers anymore. She planted her feet, locked her stance, and leveled her rifle at the man who had been her father, her god, her owner. "You are not my enemy!" Sarin shouted at Jonah, her voice echoing off the crystal walls. She turned her gaze back to Varesh. Her eyes were clear. Her hand was steady as a rock. "But you," she said, her voice dropping to a deadly whisper, "you made me one." Varesh's eyes widened. He saw it then, the final clean break. He saw his asset become the threat. "Kill her," Varesh commanded, but Sarin was already moving. She fired, not a single shot, but a tight, controlled burst. Varesh moved with inhuman speed. He activated a personal energy shield on his arm, sending the plasma bolts ricocheting into the ceiling. He lunged, his silver baton snapping open into a 6-foot energy lance that crackled with white lightning. Sarin dropped her rifle. It was useless up close, and drew her monomolecular blade. They crashed together in the center of the room in a shower of sparks that momentarily blinded the squad. The fight was a blur. Varesh was powerful, enhanced with the best Dominion tech. He fought with the lethal grace of a dancer. Serene fought like a cornered wolf, low, fast, and vicious. She dodged a swing that would have decapitated her, her own blade sparking against his armored thigh. The very air in the room seemed to crackle as the latis registered the violence, causing gravity to flicker like a dying light bulb. In an instant, the floor became a wall. Serene was thrown against the obsidian surface, but didn't fall. Her magnetic boots held fast. The laws of physics had just been rewritten. The gravity was now 90 degrees sideways. She scrambled along the vertical plane as Varesh came after her, running up the wall as if it were solid ground. They met again, 20 feet in the air, clashing sideways. "It's over, Saren," Varesh grunted, his lance pressing down on her sword. "You can't win. I know your every move because I put them there myself." Saren snarled, straining against him. "You programmed a soldier, but you forgot about the woman inside." She kicked him square in the chest, using the force of the blow to flip backward just as gravity snapped back to normal, slamming them both onto the central platform. A sharp beep from the console showed the upload at 90%. Varesh glanced at the progress bar, his face tightening. He was running out of time. He took a step back, lowering his weapon. "You've left me with no other option," he said, his voice dangerously soft. He locked eyes with Saren and spoke a string of words in a language that turned her blood to ice. "Protocol 0 null. Dissent. Silence. Obey." It was the kill code, a deep brain command hardwired into every single Halo unit officer. Serene froze. Her body locked up. Her vision faded to gray. The command bypassed her thoughts entirely, seizing control of her body like a puppet master pulling her strings. "Stop. Submit." She was paralyzed, her sword trembling in a hand that was no longer hers to command. She couldn't draw a breath. She was a prisoner in her own skin all over again. A slow, cruel smile spread across Varesh's face as he strolled toward her, casually spinning his lance. "What a disappointment," he said. "I truly hoped you'd manage to overcome the neural lock. It would have made breaking you a second time so much more entertaining." He lifted the lance, taking aim at her shoulder, ready to pin her to the floor like an insect. "Saren!" a voice called from the console. A name wasn't a command. Jonah had jumped over the barrier. He wasn't running. He was running straight for her. "Serene, look at me." Her eyes darted toward him, the only part of her she could move. Jonah didn't even try to fight Varesh. He knew it was a losing battle. Instead, he grabbed her free hand, his fingers lacing through her armored gauntlet and squeezing hard. "My name is Jonah Cade," he yelled. His gaze locked on hers. "And your name is Sarenval. You are not a piece of code. You're the one who saved me. Come back to me." The warmth of his hand, the raw fear and unwavering belief in his voice, it smashed into the gray walls of her conditioning like a wrecking ball. Varesh's words were a command, but Jonah's were the truth. Saren gasped as air flooded her lungs. The gray vanished. The fire inside her roared back to life. Varesh lunged with the lance. This time, Saren didn't freeze. She twisted her body, and the weapon glanced off her arm with a screech of superheated metal, searing the armor, but missing the bone. With a sound of pure, undiluted fury, Saren slammed her forehead directly into the bridge of Varesh's nose. There was a sickening crunch as he stumbled back, blinded by pain and shock. She didn't give him a second to recover. She swept his legs out from under him, sending him crashing to the floor. She stomped on his wrist, shattering the lance's control unit, and kicked the useless weapon away. She stood over him, her blade raised, poised to drive it straight through his throat. Varesh looked up at her, blood pouring from his nose, staining his pristine white robes. He let out a wet, gurgling laugh. "Do it," he wheezed. "Go on, Saren. Prove I was right all along. Kill your commander. Become the monster I designed you to be. Sarin's hand trembled. Every fiber of her being screamed at her to finish him, to cut out the cancer that had caused her so much pain. She stared at the tip of her sword, then she looked over at Jonah. He was watching, holding his breath, but his face was clear. He wasn't telling her what to do. He was letting her choose for herself. If she killed Varesh now, driven by rage, she would just be his weapon malfunctioning, his broken creation. Sarin made the blade disappear with a soft hum. She stepped back. "No," she said, her voice like ice. Varesh blinked, utterly confused. "You're sparing me?" "I'm not sparing you," Sarin corrected him. "I'm arresting you." She glanced at the Halo unit soldiers, who were watching the entire scene in stunned silence. "The upload is complete!" Jonah shouted. On the massive screens overhead, the data stream changed. It was no longer just her memories. It was a digital receipt, package received by the Senate Oversight Committee. Priority 1. Just then, the entire building began to groan. Deep cracks spiderwebbed across the crystal walls. The sheer energy needed to transmit the massive file had destabilized the vault's power core. "Core breach imminent," the computer announced calmly. "Evacuate." Sarin grabbed Jonah by his jacket. "We're leaving." She looked at her former squad. "If you want to live," she told them, "run." He wanted to erase history, so they left him buried under it. Sarin didn't even look back. She grabbed Jonah's arm and yanked him toward a service hatch on the floor. They leaped in, tumbling down a garbage chute just as the whole ceiling came crashing down. Down in the service tunnels, they ran for their lives. The sound of the building collapsing above them was like a monster roaring right at their heels. The whole city block was caving in. "We've got to find a ship," Jonah choked out, his lungs full of dust. Sarin pointed ahead. "There, the courier dock." Tucked away on a hidden rail was a tiny, slick little ship, the kind made for zipping data packets around, not people. It was barely big enough for one person, let alone two. They piled into the cockpit, and it was a serious squeeze. The thing was built for a robot pilot, not people. Sarin literally tossed the drone out of the way and threw herself into the seat. Jonah crammed himself in behind her, their legs a tangled mess. "Better hold on tight," she yelled, and slammed the accelerator to the floor. That tiny ship launched out of the tunnel like a cannonball, bursting into the rainy sky at the exact second the ground gave way. A giant sinkhole opened up and swallowed the entire museum district. Dust and debris shot up to kiss the storm clouds. Sarin yanked the controls, pulling crazy maneuvers to dodge the Dominion ships that were still trying to figure out what was going on. She punched in the coordinates for orbit and shut down their tracker. It wasn't until they broke through the clouds and into the dead silence of space that she finally took a breath. The only sounds in the cockpit were the low hum of the engine and their own ragged breaths. The space was so tight that Jonah was pressed right against her back, his arms braced on the console on either side of her head. Sarin spun the chair around, but it barely moved 2 inches before it was stopped by his knees. They were soaked with sweat, blood, and grime, and the adrenaline was still singing through their veins like a live wire. "You," Sarin started, her chest heaving. "You came back. You jumped over the barrier." "You froze," Jonah panted, wiping a smear of blood from his cheek. "I couldn't just let him pin you down." "You could have been killed." "So could you." They just stared at each other. In that moment, with the terrifying reality of death so close, logic went right out the window. Sarin grabbed him. She didn't even think about it. She just reached out, tangled her hands in his damp hair, and pulled his mouth down to hers. It wasn't some fairy tale kiss. It was a collision. It was teeth and desperation and the raw, hungry need to prove to themselves that they were still alive. Jonah made a sound deep in his throat and gripped her waist, pulling her as close as her armor would let him. It was messy and rough and felt like getting into a fistfight in a phone booth. For about 10 seconds, the entire universe was nothing but the heat of his skin and the taste of salt on his lips. Then Saren pulled back, pushing him just enough to create a few inches of space. Her eyes were wide and fierce, her pupils huge. "Stop!" she gasped. Jonah stopped immediately. He held his hands up, his chest rising and falling fast. "Okay," he breathed. "Okay." Stopped. Sareen stared at him, her lips swollen, her mind a whirlwind. She wanted him. God, she wanted him. But Varesh's words were still ringing in her ears. "You are my weapon." "I can't," Sareen said, her voice shaking. "I can't do this just because I'm terrified. I can't use you to make the shaking stop. That's what he did. He used people." She looked at him with a raw, terrifying vulnerability. "If I touch you," she said, "it has to be because I choose to, not because my programming is glitching, and not because I need a fix." Jonah looked at her, his own hand shaking slightly as he reached out to tuck a strand of damp hair behind her ear. "I don't want to be a drug, Saren," he said softly. "And I don't want your panic. I want you, the real you, the one who makes her own choices." He leaned back against the bulkhead, creating a respectful distance between them in the tiny space. "So we wait," he said, "until we're not bleeding anymore, and until the noise in our heads stops." Sareen nodded slowly. She took a shaky breath, trying to steady her hands. "Agreed," she whispered. She turned back to the console, her fingers flying over the controls as she brought up the navigation charts. "So where are we going?" Jonah asked, his voice almost back to normal. "Anywhere but here," Sareen replied. Just then, a notification flashed on the comms screen. It was a Dominion-wide broadcast. A heavy red banner scrolled across the bottom of the display. "Priority alert. Traitor identified. Lieutenant Sareen Val. Status: excommunicated. Accomplice: Jonah Cade. Status: bioterror artifact. Bounty: 100 million credits, dead or alive. Warning: any citizen caught aiding these fugitives will be summarily executed." Sareen stared at the screen. Her face, her real face, the one Varesh had tried to erase, was now plastered across the entire solar system. Jonah let out a low whistle. 100 million, he said. "I think that means we won." Sareen engaged the hyperdrive. The stars outside stretched into infinite lines of light. "No," she said, her eyes fixed on the new horizon. "It means we've just begun." They built me to be the perfect weapon, then threw me away like a broken toy the second I developed a conscience. For 10 years, I was their celebrated hero. Now I'm just a glitch in their system, a fugitive with 100 million credit bounty on my head. My crime? I refused to follow an order that would have cost thousands of innocent lives. They tried to decommission me, to wipe my mind. But I got away. Now, with my only friend, I'm heading straight into the lion's den on a desperate mission to expose them. They think I'm just a malfunctioning piece of equipment, but they're about to find out what a broken machine can really do. The stolen courier ship shuddered as it locked onto Zenith Prime, the glittering orbital station that served as the headquarters for the Dominion's occupation. For the first time in a decade, I wasn't wearing my armor, and I felt completely exposed. The recycled air of the cockpit felt ice cold on my bare arms. I was stuffed into a dirty maintenance tunic that my partner, Jonah, had swiped from a locker. It was a pathetic disguise, but our transponder codes identified us as a garbage scow, here to pick up recycled. "Well, you don't want to know." "Charming," Jonah muttered from behind me, pulling at the collar of his ridiculously oversized mechanic's jumpsuit. "Still, I guess it's better than being on the manifest as the 2 most wanted people in the galaxy." 100 million credits, I corrected him, my voice tight. "That's the current bounty. We're not people anymore, Jonah. We're lottery tickets." We moved toward the airlock, and I double-checked the old-fashioned pistol tucked into my waistband. It fired physical slugs, primitive, loud, but perfect for bypassing the energy shields used by station security. "Okay, remember the plan," I said, turning to him. "Find Senator Miliak. Give him the data proving Varesh's war crimes, and let him expose everything to the High Council. Jonah nodded, adding, "And we try to blend in, which means you need to relax. You walk like you're about to kick down a door." "I'm always about to kick down a door," I shot back. I took a deep breath, forced my shoulders down, and hit the button to open the airlock. The station smelled sterile, like lavender and ozone. Even down here in the service corridors, the floors gleamed and the walls were spotless white, a violent contrast to the ruined cities we'd left behind on Earth. Without my combat helmet, every sound was amplified, every movement a potential threat. I felt naked, relying on my own eyes and ears to sort through the chaos of workers and droids flowing around us. As we approached a security checkpoint, I leaned over to Jonah. "I believe the local dialect suggests we should act chill," I whispered. Jonah literally choked, staring at me in horror. "Please," he begged in a hushed tone. "Never say that again. You sound like an undercover cop trying to act cool at a high school." A blush crept up my neck. "I'm just trying to use slang to deflect suspicion. I heard Unit 7 say it." Jonah sighed. "Unit 7 is dead, Saren. Probably because he said chill in the middle of a firefight. Just try to look bored. That's how workers are supposed to look." We took a public lift, a glass tube rocketing up through the station's core to the upper ring where the senators lived. Below us, Earth was a stunning swirl of blue and white. Above, the endless black of space. The second the doors opened, the change was staggering. The floors were marble, and the air was thick with expensive perfumes. We ducked into a restroom and changed into formal wear we'd stolen from a dry-cleaning drone. The fancy clothes felt just as foreign as the maintenance rags had. I was now in a dark blue, high-collared gown that hid my pistol, but left my back exposed. Jonah looked stiff and uncomfortable in a servant's uniform. "According to this," he murmured, looking at a stolen data pad, "Senator Malik is hosting a fundraiser gala in the observation rotunda." I scoffed quietly. "A fundraiser for what?" Jonah grimaced. "The Pacification Fund." I shook my head. "Right. Bullets cost money." As we neared the entrance, my heart hammered against my ribs. Standing guard were 2 Dominion Shade Troopers, the absolute elite. They could smell fear. "Smile," I ordered Jonah through clenched teeth, hooking my arm through his. "You're my attendant. I'm some spoiled governor's daughter. If they question us, you look scared of me, not them." Jonah muttered, "That won't be difficult." I put on an air of complete, bored arrogance and strolled right past the scanners. A trooper glanced at me. His scanner read the fake biosignature Jonah had created, and he waved us through. The gala was held in a massive dome with a glass floor, making it feel like we were walking on air, suspended right above the planet they were busy exploiting. I saw the faces of the enemy everywhere. Generals who had ordered cities to be bombed were laughing with the CEOs who built the bombs for them. "There," Jonah whispered, nodding toward an ice sculpture of a warship. "That's Senator Milake." The senator was an older alien with kind eyes who was known for publicly opposing the hardline tactics of General Varesh. He seemed like our last hope. "He looks reasonable," I said. "Reports say he's our guy." Jonah gave me a dark look. "Reports also said you were a mindless killing machine. Let's get proof before we trust anyone." To blend in, I grabbed a glass of wine. As we moved through the crowd, I overheard a group of Dominion officers talking. "Such a shame about the V-Series unit," one of them said. "She was a beautiful design, but flawed." Another one laughed. "Varesh always cared too much about looks. A weapon shouldn't look like a woman. It confuses the inventory logs." My hand tightened on the wine glass until it nearly shattered. To them, I wasn't a hero who'd turned traitor. I wasn't even a threat. I was a broken toaster. "Easy," Jonah whispered, his hand gently touching my back, anchoring me to reality. "Don't let them get to you." "I know," I breathed, forcing the rage down. "Let's find his private office. If he's really the good guy, he'll have his own files on Varesh's crimes." We slipped away from the party and found the senator's private suite. Jonah quickly looped the security camera while I stood guard, and we ducked inside. The office was filled with stolen art from conquered worlds. "Okay, I'm in," Jonah said, his fingers flying across the holographic terminal. "Standard Senate encryption. They're lazy." He started scrolling through files, and I watched his face, saw the exact moment his hope vanished. He just stopped, staring at the screen, his skin turning pale. "What is it?" I asked. His voice was a bare whisper. "Sarin. He isn't fighting Varesh. He's competing with him." He pulled up a blueprint for something called Project Silence. "Look," Jonah said, pointing at the author logs. "Milaik didn't oppose the memory wiping program. He helped design it. He's just angry he's not getting a bigger piece of the budget." My blood ran cold as I read the files. They weren't just planning to erase the memories of soldiers anymore. They were planning to do it to everyone, leaders, teachers, parents. "It's a way to manufacture consent," Jonah said, his voice hollow. "No more resistance, just a permanent, chemically induced peace where everyone is happy because they can't remember ever being sad." This was the peace I'd been forced to kill for. It wasn't a civilization. It was a lobotomy. "We have to go," I said, grabbing his arm. "We can't give him our data." Just as we turned to leave, the door chimed. Someone was coming. We scrambled out onto a private balcony as Senator Milaik walked into his office. We were trapped. I leaned against the railing, looking down at the beautiful, doomed world below. "There are no good guys, are there?" I said softly. Jonah came to stand beside me. "Then we'll have to be." A new fire ignited inside me. He was right. We weren't there to expose one man anymore. We were going to expose all of them. We were going to broadcast every sick detail of Project Silence not just to the galaxy, but to every guest at this ridiculous party. The elites were about to get a show they'd never forget. Varesh and Milaik. They're two heads of the same monster. Just different nameplates on the office door of the same slaughterhouse. Jonah stood next to her, looking exhausted. The stiff servant's uniform he wore was like a costume, a shell that couldn't contain the man inside. "We're the good guys," he said, his voice low. "It sounds simple, I know, but it's true. We're the only ones who know what's really happening and haven't tried to cash in on it." Sarin stared at her own hands. They were perfectly manicured, clean, and bloodless. They looked like they belonged to a stranger. "I don't know who I am when I'm not following orders, Jonah," she confessed, her voice a mere whisper, stripped of all its usual authority. For 10 years, I'd wake up, and a screen would tell me what my day was. It told me who to kill. It told me who to save. Now that screen is dark, and I'm terrified. Jonah turned to face her fully. He didn't try to touch her this time. He just looked, really looked, seeing the woman under the elegant gown and the soldier under the skin. "Your identity isn't what they made you remember, Sarin," he said gently. "Memories can be faked. You saw that yourself. Your identity is what you choose to do now. Think about it." He stepped a little closer, the distant starlight reflecting in his dark eyes. "You chose to let Varesh live. You chose to rescue me. You chose to squeeze into that ridiculous dress and walk into a lion's den because you thought you could help people you've never even met. That's who you are." Sarin looked up at him, and the chilling emptiness inside her chest started to fill with something new. It wasn't anger, and it wasn't duty. It was a fierce, burning warmth. She reached out, her palm resting flat against his chest, right over his heart. She could feel it beating, fast, steady, and so very alive. "I want to choose this," she whispered. This time, she was the one who closed the distance. There was no hesitation, no hint of panic. She slid her hand up to the back of his neck, her fingers tangling in his hair. Jonah made a soft sound in his throat and pulled her flush against him. The kiss was unhurried, a question and an answer all at once. It tasted like expensive wine and shared fear, but it was grounded in the undeniable reality of the moment. Seren molded her body to his. For a soldier who'd been trained to see physical touch as either a combat move or a medical necessity, this was a revelation. This wasn't about taking control. It was about letting go. It was about being wanted, not as a weapon, but as a person. Her fingers traced the seam of his tunic, hungry for the simple texture of him. Jonah's hands explored the silk of her dress, his touch respectful but also possessive, charting the curves her armor always concealed. "You're real," she breathed against his lips. "So are you," he answered. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing heavily, their foreheads resting together. The intimacy was electrifying, like a live wire exposed to the air. In that instant, Saren felt a wave of fierce protectiveness. She would burn the entire station to ash before she let anyone harm him. "Well," a smooth voice drawled from the doorway, "this is certainly an unexpected development." Saren spun around in a flash, her hand instinctively diving for the pistol hidden in her dress. Senator Mick stood there in the open doorway, and he hadn't come alone. 6 heavily armed shade troopers flanked him, their weapons already raised. They were holding paralysis rifles, silent, instantaneous, and impossible to dodge. "Don't even think about it," Meek said with a pleasant smile, holding up a hand. "My security system flagged your fake ID the second you walked into my office. I was just curious to see what you'd do next." Saren's mind raced, calculating the odds. 6 hostiles at 10 meters. Her pistol had 12 rounds. She could probably take down 3 of them before the paralysis beams hit her, but Jonah was standing right in the line of fire. She moved without thinking, placing her body in front of his. "Let him go," Saren said, her voice shifting into the cold, hard register of command. "I'm the one you want. I'm the asset. He's just a civilian." Mick let out a soft chuckle as he strolled out onto the balcony, swirling the blue wine in his glass. "Oh, Lieutenant, you really haven't been keeping up with the market, have you? You're a deprecated model. Varesh has already put in an order for the new line of Halo units. But Mr. Cade here?" He glanced at Jonah with a predatory gleam in his eye. A natural-born human who can interface with the Lattice? A biological translator? He's the rarest thing in the entire sector. Varesh wants him eliminated, yes, but I think I can find a much more profitable use for his brain. Once we get rid of that pesky personality, of course. "Run," Saren whispered to Jonah. Before Jonah could even react, the troopers fired. It wasn't a lethal shot. It was a shimmering net of energized plasma. It slammed into both of them, wrapping around them, locking every muscle in their bodies and sending them crashing to the deck in a tangled heap of limbs and silk. Saren fought against the paralysis, her mind screaming orders that her body couldn't follow. She watched, helpless, as the troopers hauled Jonah to his feet and began dragging him away. "Saren!" Jonah yelled, struggling against their grip. "Don't let them rewrite you!" Then the door slid shut, and he was gone. Mick stood over Saren, looking down at her with an expression of mixed pity and disgust. "Take her to the medical bay," he ordered his men. "We need to see if there's anything worth salvaging in that skull of hers before we sell her back to her commander." The medical bay was a nightmare of white, sterile surfaces that smelled of antiseptic and deceit. Saren found herself strapped upright to a surgical table. The paralysis had faded, only to be replaced by the cold, biting grip of Durasteel restraints. Mick stood at a nearby console, tapping in a series of commands. A large robotic arm, tipped with a neural interface needle, whirred to life and hovered over Saren's head. "I have a proposition for you, Lieutenant," Mick said without turning to look at her. Saren strained against the restraints. They were magnetically locked. Brute force wasn't going to work. "Go to hell," she spat. Mick finally turned. Varesh is on his way. He'll be here in 1 hour. When he gets here, he's going to execute you, publicly and painfully. He needs to make an example of you." He walked closer. "But I can offer you another way out. I can perform a localized reset. We wipe the last 48 hours. We erase the memory of the Echo Vault. We erase the memory of the human. We restore your original loyalty settings." "And then?" Saren asked, her eyes narrowing to slits. "And then I return you to Varesh as a recovered asset. I'll tell him you were kidnapped and drugged by an insurgent. You get to go back to your unit. You get to survive." "And Jonah?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. Mick just shrugged. "The human will be processed. But you won't remember him, so it won't hurt. Consider it a kindness, really." Sareen stared at the needle. It was the same type of machine that had unmade her 10 years ago. It was offering her oblivion. It was offering an end to all this pain. It was offering the simple comfort of being a tool again. But then she remembered the observation deck. She remembered Jonah's words. "Identity is what you choose." She looked at Mick. She just needed to get him a little closer to that console. "Okay," Saren said, her voice barely a whisper. Mick paused. "Excuse me?" "I said okay," Saren repeated, allowing a tremor of manufactured fear into her voice. "I don't want to die. I don't want to remember any of this. Please, just make it stop." A slow smile spread across Mick's face. It was the smile of a man who was certain that everyone had a price. "A wise choice, Lieutenant." He walked right over to the table to prep the interface. He leaned in close, checking the dilation of her pupils. "Hold still now," he said. "This will only sting for a moment." Sareen waited until his face was just 6 inches from hers, so close she could smell the expensive wine on his breath. She didn't have her hands. She didn't have her legs. But she had the one weapon Jonah had given her, the language of the machines. The neural needle had a voice override safety protocol. It was a relic from an older system, something Jonah had mentioned in passing. A failsafe for the original scientists, in case their test subjects got out of hand. "System," Saren whispered, her voice switching to the archaic, high-dominion dialect Jonah had taught her. "Override target lock. Administrator." The machine froze instantly. The small red camera eye swiveled away from Saren and focused directly on Mick. The senator's eyes went wide with terror. "What did you— Execute!" Sareen commanded. The robotic arm whipped around with horrifying speed. The neural needle didn't hit Saren. It slammed into the side of Mick's neck. The senator let out a choked scream as the probe discharged a massive jolt of neurosuppressants straight into his spine. He collapsed to the floor, twitching, his eyes rolling back in his head. Saren shouted the release code for the restraints, another gift from Jonah's encyclopedic knowledge of Dominion tech. The magnetic locks clicked open. She stumbled to the floor, rubbing her bruised wrists. She snatched Mick's keycard from his limp fingers and lunged for the console. She wasn't running. She wasn't escaping. She had work to do. She hacked into the station's public address system. She took control of the holographic projectors in the Grand Rotunda, the massive billboards in the commercial district, and the tactical displays inside every soldier's helmet. She plugged in the data drive she'd been carrying since the Echo Vault. But she didn't just upload the historical files. She skillfully spliced in the conversation she had just recorded in Mick's office, his confession about the caste system, his admission that the entire opposition was a lie. "This is for the silenced," she whispered, and hit broadcast. In the rotunda, the orchestra music screeched to a halt. Every screen, every hollow emitter, every single window suddenly flickered to life, showing the same video feed. The wealthy guests watched Sareen's memories of the massacre. They saw Varesh giving the order to wipe the colonists' minds. They heard Milek laughing about manufacturing consent. They want a permanent peace where everyone thinks they're happy because they can't remember ever being sad. The stunned silence in the gala lasted for exactly 3 seconds. Then, a human waiter dropped his silver tray with a loud crash. He stared at the senator he had been serving, a man he now knew considered him to be nothing more than livestock. The waiter slowly picked up a steak knife. In the lower levels, thousands of workers finally saw the truth. They saw that their suffering wasn't a tragic consequence of war, it was a deliberate design feature. The station didn't just have ripples of unrest. It broke. Serene grabbed a heavy pulse pistol from the unconscious senator and sprinted out of the medical bay. The station was eating itself alive. Sirens screamed down hallways choked with smoke and panic. Dominion soldiers scrambled in every direction, but the chain of command had shattered. Some ripped off their helmets, their faces pale with shock as they stared at the truth flickering on public monitors. Others just opened fire, mowing down anyone in their path. Serene moved through the madness like a ghost in a shredded ball gown, blasting security cameras and putting down loyalist troopers with shots to the knee. She finally reached the detention block. The guard was just a kid, trembling as he watched the broadcast on a datapad. He looked up at Serene, his voice breaking. "Is that real? Did they do that to us?" "Open the door," Serene said, her voice surprisingly soft. "And go home." The kid unlocked the cell. Then he dropped his rifle and sprinted down the corridor. Jonah was inside, pacing like a caged animal. His head snapped up as Serene stormed in. "You're alive," he gasped, a wave of relief washing over his face. "I'm annoyed," Serene shot back, tossing him a rifle she'd picked up. "And we're leaving." They fought their way back toward the docks. The whole station was a funeral pyre. Smoke clogged the upper ring, and high-ranking senators were shoving each other aside, desperate to reach the last escape pods. The iron-fisted peace of the Dominion had dissolved in 10 minutes of a forbidden broadcast. They made it to their courier ship and hit the release clamps, drifting away from the inferno. Just then, a shadow blotted out the stars. A colossal warship tore through hyperspace, emerging right in front of them. It was the Indomitable, Varesh's personal flagship. It was a monster of a ship, bristling with enough cannons to crack a moon. A message came through on all channels, cold and clear. It wasn't a demand for surrender. It was a fleet-wide command. "This is Commander Varesh. The station has been compromised. The infection is absolute." Serene watched the monitor, her hand instinctively tightening on Jonah's arm. "Initiate Protocol Omega," Varesh's voice declared, devoid of any emotion. "Burn it. Burn it all. Leave no survivors." The warship's batteries blazed to life, but they weren't aimed at their tiny ship. They were aimed at Zenith Prime itself. Varesh wasn't there to capture traitors. He was there to sterilize the crime scene, along with 50,000 souls. "My God," Jonah whispered. "He's going to kill them all." Serene slammed her hands on the controls, firing up the engines. "Not if we give him something better to chase," she snarled. She keyed the comms, forcing a direct channel to the flagship's bridge. "Varesh," she yelled into the mic, "I have the original data drive. You want it buried? Come and get it." She jammed the throttle forward, sending their little ship screaming down into the planet's atmosphere. On the tactical display, the massive turrets of the warship paused, then slowly rotated. They left the station behind. They were tracking the courier. "He took the bait," Serene said, her expression grim. She glanced at Jonah. "Hold on tight. This is going to hurt." The courier ship was little more than a mangled heap of metal and sparking wires, wedged deep inside a massive ventilation shaft in Sector 0. Serene kicked the emergency hatch, which shrieked as the warped durasteel tore free. Thick white smoke poured into the station's maintenance spine. She hauled Jonah from the wreckage. He was hacking and coughing, his legs refusing to hold him as he struggled to find his footing on the metal grating. The sedative Meek had pumped into him was fighting a losing war with his adrenaline, leaving his face ashen and his body trembling. "We're not done yet," Serene grunted, slinging his arm over her shoulders. The silk of her gown was in tatters, hanging like ribbons over the tactical undersuit she'd pulled from the ship's emergency locker. She'd strapped on mismatched pieces of armor, a shin guard here, a gauntlet there. She looked like a fallen queen who'd clawed her way out of a tomb to finish a war. "The broadcast core," Jonah mumbled, his eyes struggling to focus. "The signal. It was just local. We need to boost it." "I know," Saren said, her grip firm. "Just stay with me, Jonah. Don't you dare pass out on me now." Zenith Prime groaned around them like a dying beast. The structural integrity fields were flickering, making the artificial gravity lurch and fail in sickening waves. Far down the curved corridor, flashes of laser fire painted the walls. The mutiny wasn't a clean break. It was a brutal, bloody civil war. They pushed on, Serene bracing them both, her mag boots locking to the floor each time the gravity gave out. It was a twisted reflection of the memory she'd finally unlocked. The armored soldier saving the small child. Only this time there was no programming, no orders telling her what to do. There was only her own fierce will, holding him up because the idea of letting him go hurt more than the piece of shrapnel digging into her side. Up ahead, a squad of loyalist mercs was setting up a heavy repeater cannon behind a wall of supply crates. Sarin didn't even slow down. There was no time to be clever. There was only rage. "Stay here," she told Jonah, propping him against the wall. And then she moved. She became a blur of controlled chaos, using the failing gravity as a weapon. When the gravity cut out, she sprinted along the wall. When it slammed back on, she dropped from the ceiling, landing silently right behind them. She didn't waste ammo. She used the station itself. She ripped open a steam pipe, instantly blinding them in a hissing cloud, then moved through the whiteout with her combat knife. It was over in less than 10 seconds. She walked back to Jonah, calmly wiping her blade clean. "Think you can walk?" she asked. Jonah stared at the bodies, then back at her. He managed a pained smile that was more of a grimace. "If you carry me any farther, my ego might not survive." He pushed himself off the wall, unsteady but on his own 2 feet. They finally reached the central broadcast core. It was like stepping into a cathedral of data. A massive, cylindrical chamber stretched up through the entire station, and in its center pulsed a pillar of pure blue light, the heart of the Dominion's network. "This is it," Jonah said, stumbling toward an interface console. "If I can patch the Echo Drive into the main directory from here, the truth becomes a part of the system. It'll be written into the code of every ship, every data pad, every kid's school terminal from here to the outer rim. They'll never be able to erase it." "Then do it," Saren said, turning to guard the massive blast doors. "I'll buy you time." The doors hissed open. Serene snapped her rifle up, her finger on the trigger, but she froze. It was Commander Varesh, and he was alone. He looked perfect, untouched by the chaos, the smoke, the blood. His brilliant white armor gleamed under the harsh lights, and his crimson cape settled around his boots like a fresh pool of blood. He strode into the room, his hands empty and open at his sides. "Sarin," he said, and his voice was warm and rich, like a father welcoming his lost daughter home. "You look exhausted." "I'm not tired," Sarin said, keeping the rifle aimed squarely at his head. "I'm focused." Varesh stopped about 10 feet away. He glanced over at Jonah, who was frantically yanking wires from the console. "He's struggling," Varesh observed with a hint of pity. "Look at him, Sarin. He's broken. The human mind was never built to carry the weight of the lattice. He's in so much pain." Sarin shifted her stance, putting herself directly between Varesh and Jonah. "Don't you talk about him. I can help him," Varesh said softly. Sarin went still. "I can save him, Sarin," Varesh continued, taking one slow, deliberate step forward. "I have the medical override codes. I can flush the neurotoxins from his system, repair the damage to his mind." He paused, letting the offer hang in the silent room. "And I can help you. I can take away this pain. The guilt you carry for what you did to him, the horrors of the war, I can erase it all. Smooth over the rough edges. We can start again. The three of us. No more fighting. No more scars. Only peace. It was the cruelest weapon he could have possibly used. He wasn't offering her power or wealth. He was offering her quiet. He was offering to make the screaming in her head finally stop. Sarin looked at Jonah. He was ghostly pale, sweat dripping from his chin, his hands shaking so violently he could barely hold his tool. He looked like he was in hell. All she had to do was lower her gun. Varesh could fix him. Varesh could fix her. They could go back to sleep. And that sleep was so warm. Sarin turned her gaze back to the commander. "And what happens to the truth?" she asked, her voice tight. "The truth is negotiable," Varesh said with a benevolent smile. "It's a story, Sarin, and we can write a happy ending. Why would you choose to suffer when you can have perfection?" "Because it's a lie!" Sarin screamed, the anger boiling up inside her, hot and pure. "A cure built on a lie is just a prettier cage," she yelled, her voice echoing in the giant chamber. "If you take away my pain, you take away what it taught me. If you take away his scars, you erase the fact that he survived. We aren't your rough drafts to be edited. We are real, Varesh." His smile evaporated. The mask of the caring father dissolved, revealing the cold, reptilian strategist beneath. "Then you are a flaw," he said, his voice flat. And he moved. He didn't pull a weapon. He just changed the rules of the room. He had the station's master codes. In an instant, the gravity reversed, slamming Sarin hard against the ceiling. Her rifle clattered away. Varesh floated up to meet her, an energy blade hissing to life from his gauntlet. He lunged. Sarin threw up her armored forearm, the blade searing the metal. She kicked out, but with his suit's stabilizers, he was an immovable object. He grabbed her ankle and threw her down, which was now up, smashing her against the central data pillar. "Jonah!" Sarin screamed as her body hit the pillar. "Just keep working!" "I can't get past the admin lock," Jonah yelled back, clinging to the console to keep from floating away as the room's orientation shifted wildly. "He owns the whole system!" Sarin scrambled to her feet on the ceiling. Varesh was coming at her again. He was stronger, faster, and he literally controlled the battlefield. She couldn't outfight him. She had to outthink him. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for an advantage. The core was cooled by massive vents, periodically releasing jets of liquid nitrogen. Sarin planted her feet and waited. Varesh lunged, his energy blade aimed right for her throat. She didn't move. She just activated the magnetic clamps in her boots, locking herself to the wall, model. Her arm screamed in protest as she grabbed his wrist, the mechanics inside her groaning under the impossible pressure. "Now!" she gasped. Instead of aiming for him, she shot the grappling hook from her arm straight past his head, targeting a coolant pipe on the wall. With a sharp tug, the pipe burst. A massive cloud of freezing gas erupted, swallowing Varesh whole. His shield flickered once, then vanished. The joints of his high-tech armor seized up with a screech of metal. He bellowed in frustration, his biggest advantage, his speed, gone in an instant. Sarin disengaged her magnetic boots and dropped, slamming her knee hard into his chest. They hit the deck together, but the fight wasn't over. He wasn't just a machine. With his real hand, he wrapped his fingers around her neck and squeezed with terrifying strength. "You're nothing," he hissed, his face so close she could feel his breath. "A mistake. I created you." Across the room, Jonah frantically worked at the console, watching in horror as Sarin's face began to turn a dark shade of purple. The screen flashed the same frustrating message over and over. Access denied. He couldn't break through the broadcast encryption. It was ironclad. A light bulb went off. He stopped trying to hack the station and started hacking the man. The commander's suit was wired into the entire station's network. It was his command center, his eye in the sky, and that connection went both ways. "I'm not trying to break in," Jonah muttered, his fingers a blur on the keypad. "I'm yanking you out." He triggered a massive data feedback loop. He aimed for the one thing Varesh would never protect: the personal memory drive in his suit, the black box that logged every command he'd ever issued. "Gotcha," Jonah whispered as he slammed the enter key. The room's central pillar flared from cool blue to a brilliant, painful white. All around them, the gigantic holographic screens, usually filled with images of Dominion glory, stuttered to life. Varesh's face appeared, but it wasn't the confident leader from the news. This was a recording from 20 years ago. "Subject 619, his voice echoed, cold and clinical. "The child is resisting the memory wipe. Up the voltage." The scene changed. Varesh, standing on a mountain of civilian corpses. Varesh, smiling as he authorized the extermination of an entire refugee camp. The final clip showed Varesh staring into a mirror, practicing the warm, fatherly smile he always used for the cameras. Down on the floor, the real Varesh went rigid, his hand falling away from Sarin's neck. He looked up and saw his darkest secrets exposed for everyone to see on a 50-foot screen. "No," he breathed. But this wasn't just playing in the command center. It was on every monitor, on every ship, inside every soldier's helmet. Just outside the door, the sounds of battle died down to an eerie silence. His loyal soldiers lowered their weapons, staring in disbelief at their data pads. They were finally seeing the man they fought for. The legend of Varesh didn't just break, it exploded. He let go of Sarin completely and staggered backward, grabbing his head. "Shut it down!" he shrieked. "I am the law. I am what's necessary." Sarin dragged in a painful breath, rubbing the dark bruises already forming on her throat. She got to her feet, picked up her rifle, and advanced on him. He was on his knees, howling at the screens as if his voice alone could erase the truth. He looked so small, so pathetic. She pressed the cold barrel of her rifle right between his eyes. He glared up at her, his expression a mix of madness and panic. "Go on," he snarled. "Kill me. Turn me into a martyr. I'll be a symbol of your rebellion." Sarin's finger tensed on the trigger. A voice in her head screamed to just do it, to finish this monster and end the pain. She glanced over at Jonah, who was watching her quietly from the console. He didn't move, didn't speak. He just trusted her. Sarin looked up at the undeniable proof of Varesh's evil playing out for the whole galaxy to see. "If I shoot you," she said, her voice as sharp and clear as glass, "I'm no better than you. Just another soldier following the orders of my own rage." She lowered her weapon and switched her comms to the open channel. "This is Lieutenant Sarinval," she announced, her voice ringing with authority throughout the station. "I'm placing Commander Varesh under arrest for crimes against every sentient species in the Dominion. He will be taken alive." She looked down at the broken man at her feet. "You don't get to be a legend," she whispered. "You get to be a prisoner. You get to sit in a courtroom and tell the universe why you thought it was okay to slaughter children. You get to be forgotten." She swung the butt of her rifle, and he crumpled to the floor, unconscious. Two of his elite soldiers stepped into the room, their expressions unreadable. They glanced at Sarin, then at their former commander on the ground. "Get him out of here," Sarin commanded. For a second, they didn't move. Then one of them gave her a slow, deliberate nod, a gesture of respect. They hauled Varesh's body out of the room. The moment they were gone, Sarin's rifle clattered to the floor. Her legs buckled, but Jonah was already there, catching her and easing her down until they were both sitting on the floor, leaning against the console as the hum of the station broadcast the truth to the entire galaxy. "We won!" Jonah breathed, his head resting against her shoulder. Serene kept her eyes shut. "We survived," she corrected him. "There's a big difference." What followed wasn't a victory celebration. It was months of chaos. With Varesh gone, the Dominion government collapsed on itself, the senators scrambling for power. The evidence Serene and Jonah had unleashed ignited rebellions on over a dozen planets. Almost overnight, Earth went from being occupied territory to a key player in negotiations, mostly because the Dominion Navy was too busy putting down its own mutinies to keep up the blockade. A new government was eventually formed, but it was slow, complicated, and full of arguments. It was a mess. But it was also freedom. 3 months after Varesh's fall, Serene found herself in a quiet hallway in the newly restored archives back on Earth. The place smelled like damp earth and old books, a scent she'd grown to find comforting. She was dressed in regular clothes, just a sweater and pants. But without her armor, she felt exposed. Jonah was nearby, tinkering with a server. He looked better, she noticed. The dark circles under his eyes had finally faded. He heard her footsteps and turned around. "Hey," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "You're here early. The rookies don't show up till noon." "I came to see you," she said simply, walking toward him. You could feel the tension between them, the unspoken conversation they'd been putting off while the galaxy sorted itself out. Jonah leaned back against the server rack. "So the tribunal officially cleared me. My record's been wiped clean." Serene nodded. "I heard. They offered me a position in the new Earth Defense Force, training the first integrated unit." "That makes sense," Jonah said with a small smile. "You've always been a teacher, Saren. Even when you were just yelling at me to get to cover." Serene looked at her own hands, then took a deep breath. "There's something I need you to see," she said. She grabbed the bottom of her sweater. Jonah tensed up for a moment, but he held her gaze as she pulled it over her head. Underneath, she just had on a plain tank top, leaving her shoulders and arms exposed. And the scars were all there. The twisted symbol Varesh had branded on her skin, the silvery tracks of old plasma burns, the neat lines from countless surgeries. For the first time, she stood before him without the armor that had been her prison and her identity for so long. She was letting him see the history of her pain. "I'm not healed," she said, her voice shaking just a little. "I still have nightmares. I still check every room for a way out. I'm broken, Jonah." He moved closer and gently traced the ugly brand on her shoulder with his fingertips. "I'm angry," he confessed, his voice low. "I wake up furious every morning, thinking about everything they took from us. Sometimes I just want to watch the world burn." He met her gaze. "But I don't want to be angry by myself, and I don't want you to be scared by yourself." He took both of her hands. "Love isn't about making the scars disappear, Saren. It's about seeing them, really seeing them, and choosing to stay. It's about deciding the person standing in front of you is worth all the baggage." Saren looked back at him, seeing both the scared kid she'd protected and the brave man who'd just saved the galaxy. She saw herself reflected in his eyes. Cracked, but not shattered. She tightened her grip on his hands. "I choose this," she whispered. "I choose you." A genuine smile spread across Jonah's face, lighting up his eyes. "Good choice, Lieutenant." The field was a sea of mud. A steady rain fell, turning the entire obstacle course into a slippery mess. 30 recruits stood at attention, a perfect mix of humans and former Dominion soldiers. You could practically feel the mistrust radiating between them, the result of 100 years of brainwashing and war. Sarinval walked down the line, her uniform plain, with no rank or medals. She paused in front of a young Dominion defector who was shooting daggers at the human woman beside him. "What is your mission?" Sarin asked him. The soldier stiffened. "To eliminate the threat, ma'am." "Incorrect," Sarin said calmly. She addressed the whole group. "Turn and look at the person standing next to you." After a moment's hesitation, they all did. "That person is not your enemy," Sarin's voice cut through the sound of the downpour. "That person is your partner. Here, we don't fight for a government or for a commander. We fight for the person next to us." She paced back to the front of the formation. "We live by 3 rules here," she announced. "Consent, truth, and empathy. If any of you have a problem with that, you can walk away right now." Nobody moved an inch. "Excellent," Sarin said. "Let's get started." High on a nearby hill, Jonah stood under an awning, watching the scene unfold. He held a data pad, carefully saving the footage. He was building a new archive, a vault of memories, to make sure this new beginning, and everything that came after, would be remembered exactly as it happened, with no lies. Sarin looked up. Through the viewport, she saw his reflection watching her. She didn't need to salute, and a wave felt wrong. She just met his eyes in the glass, and in the quiet of her own mind, for the first time in forever, the noise was gone. The voice of her commander, of Varesh, was finally silent. All she could hear was the steady beat of her own heart. Jonah lifted his hand. A silent question in the cramped space. Sarin answered with a smile, a real one, something sharp and bright, and all her own. She curled her fingers into a fist, a small gesture of strength. "We're not enemies," she said, her voice clear and sure. And just like that, after 100 years of fighting, her war was finally over.